Good morning. I'm going to talk briefly about the creation of this map I made. I work at the National Park Service in publications, so this is a print map. It's not, a physical 3D model. When you think of national parks, you often think of the big parks, Grand Canyon and Yosemite out west, but there are 417 units. And many of them are small, relatively small, and most of them are east of the Mississippi. This one is Booker T. Washington National Monument in Southern Virginia. And it's where Washington was born and lived as a slave until he was 8 years old. It exists still as a living history farm. So to do that, I used a software I hadn't used before. It's an advanced 3D software called Vue, and it's commonly used for animations and movies and stuff like that. And there has been some map work, and so I'm just going to kind of briefly go through that process. This is just kind of my worldview of 3D maps, of what I've done, or 3D elements on maps. And I'll just kind of give context of what this map is. I'll show you some more simpler versions of 3D maps, and then more versions of this type of map made in Vue. So axonometric buildings, these are just made in Adobe Illustrator. They can be fit onto planimetric normal maps, and they're good for walking tour maps or something like that. Small, medium scale 3D. This was created by one of my colleagues, shows the Katmai coastline in Alaska, and it was made in Natural Scene Designer. So the point of kind of showing this is that if you were going to try to make a 3D map like this, you'd be better off using Natural Scene Designer and not Vue that I used. This is another one made in Natural Scene Designer, sort of small, medium scale. Doesn't need the complexity of Vue. So this one was made in Vue. This was made by Alex Tate in International Mapping. And I kind of shooting myself in the foot here because this is way better than anything I can produce, but that's sort of what I'm working towards. This is Saugus Iron Works up in Massachusetts. This is another one made by Alex Tate in International Mapping. It's Weir Farm. And I'll zoom in on a little bit of this just to show what this software can do. If you can see the windows in the buildings, you're probably talking pretty large scale, and has this sort of hyper-realistic view perspective. And some people may say, is this a map or is this an illustration? And I think that's a valid point, a valid argument, but it does sort of contain all the elements of a map. It can be used for user navigation and visitor navigation. So when you're creating this type of map, you do not end up with a georeferenced map, but you can use geospatial data. You can import DEMs, and you can import vector data, and you can use masks to place all your elements, and that's kind of what you need to do. So it's created with geospatial data, but you do not have a georeferenced map. So using masks, you can put elements on you create masks that are the same size as your DEM, and then by using that, you can put different elements on there. And these are some of the elements you can put on there. Ecosystems are very important in Vue. I will not be able to go into them because they're kind of complicated, but they're really good for making landscapes, and you can pick different kinds of trees, plants, anything like that, clouds, textures. So the workflow was primarily Sketchup to Vue to Photoshop. So Sketchup's another 3D software that's much simpler than Vue for creating 3D objects. You can also import 3D OBJ files from other sources. You can edit them. You can apply textures and colors, and then you can bring that into Vue. This is a grape arbor that I found, edited a little bit, and then placed it into Vue and rendered it out. This is some split rail fence, which is common in that area of Virginia from that time period. And again, brought it into SketchUp, did a lot of work on it, and then placed it in Vue. And the tobacco barn from the plantation, this was just completely created. This isn't someone else's object. It's a pretty simple structure. So SketchUp is actually pretty user-friendly, and you can create this stuff pretty quickly. And then Photoshop touch-ups. So this is actually the raw render I got from the software, and it looks kind of harsh. I'm not sure what it looks like in this projector light, but I will step forward and show you, after all the Photoshop adjustments, what it looks like. So changing lighting, changing colors. You can see if I go back and forth, the yellows and reds are much more subdued. There's actually additional features. You can render other stuff out and put it onto your map. I'll talk about a few of those. There's corn in the background on this map. I tried editing the corn and getting it to look good, but eventually I just, got a Photoshop brush and painted in more corn. You can do water features in Vue, but I haven't quite figured it out. So instead of banging my head towards the end of this project, I just painted in water features. And there's even some geese in there, and those I just stole from the Saugus Ironworks map. Why not? And this is a sort of a living history farm. There are animals there, and the park wanted to show the animals. And you can get animal models and render them out, but I didn't do that. I just went and got some photographs of animals and put them in there and drew in some shadows and had to change the lighting on a lot of the animals with just Photoshop brushes to get them to kind of fit in the landscape, but makes it a little bit more complete. And there's so much more I can't talk about in a 10-minute conversation about Vue that you can do in there to make these realistic landscapes. I mean, you can do animation. This software has been used for very popular movies, Avatar, Pirates of the Caribbean, and others. Very realistic clouds. There's some water there that I did render out, just kind of playing with it, like how you can, all the different options you can do with waves and direction. And then ecosystems, which I didn't really have to go into, but that's pretty important to using Vue and placing elements around your map. So there's the final product, just sort of bigger, showing all the elements that went into it. This was printed in a brochure. So in context, there is the brochure, the front side of the brochure where the map was placed. So of course there's text and lots of other things in there. And then just last, shameless plug, I started an Instagram account for work that sort of features national park maps created at Harpers Ferry Center, where I work. And yeah, you should check it out if you like maps. I don't know. And that's all.
Thanks, Jim. Any questions for Jim?
With your workflow, what's sort of the time frame that it takes you to go from SketchUp all the way through to your finished product?
It's an excellent question. This was my first time using this software, and of course I was working on many other projects at the same time, so the learning curve is extremely steep. It's probably the most difficult software. I've tried to wrap my head around it, and there's not a lot of good information about making maps with this software. People make fantasy landscapes and stuff like that with it. So the time frame, I worked on this project for many months, probably hundreds of hours. Maybe 100 hours, I don't know.
One more for Jim?
When you want to make a change and then refresh your screen, what's the time lag? Is it a quick refresh, or does it take time and time and time when the clock moves?
Yeah, lots of time, and that's why Photoshop is your friend for changes. So on this laptop, I did most of my rendering on this laptop. Towards the end, I started doing it on a bigger computer, but it can take 36 hours straight of rendering to create that image on the laptop. Yeah, that's a good point. And then the better computer can maybe do it in 8 or 10 hours, but depending on your elements, if you need to change something and re-render it out, that's a big deal.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Jim.